support beams. What happens when you find, like, miles of carefully laid detonator wire hiding under the... You know, if you step into the rubble of an earthquake, you grieve. I mean, it's chaos. It's just nature being entirely unpredictable and cruel.
Right.
But what happens when you look down into that dust and you see cleanly cut support beams? What happens when you find, like, miles of carefully laid detonator wire hiding under the concrete?
Yeah, the whole narrative fractures.
Exactly. It's not a natural, unpredictable disaster anymore. You realize the chaos was engineered. And today, we're looking at a document that essentially holds up that detonator wire.
It's a really heavy one today.
Yeah, it is. We're doing a deep dive into a raw, just furious ledger written in the aftermath of the 2019 Sri Lankan Easter Sunday bombings. It's a powerful Sinhala poem by Wirathunga W. Nimmal titled, in translation, "Can't Even the Gods Solve This?"
Which is such a profound piece of public memory. I mean, for you listening, this deep dive is really going to explore how a society processes a catastrophic trauma, especially when they suspect the official story is, well, a complete fabrication.
Right.
Because the 2019 attacks, these were a series of coordinated bombings at churches and hotels. Over 300 people lost their lives. And the poet uses this text to direct these piercing, almost desperate questions at divine justice.
Yeah, and they use that framework to articulate a devastating critique of political leadership and, you know, alleged conspiracies and hidden hands.
Exactly. But before we get into the actual mechanics of the poem, we really need to set a clear parameter for you, the listener.
Yes, absolutely.
The source material we're examining today contains some very severe, explosive allegations. We're talking about claims of political complicity, massive cover-ups, and extreme negligence by high-ranking officials in Sri Lanka.
And we need to be very clear that in analyzing this poem, we are not taking sides.
Right. No.
We're not independently endorsing or validating the specific claims or, you know, the conspiracy theories the poet presents. Our role here is to impartially examine the text as a highly significant cultural artifact.
We're just looking at how raw, unfiltered public grief and deep cynicism are captured in this specific piece of writing.
Yeah, exactly. We want to see how the poet builds their argument.
And that distinction is really vital because the poet is building a very specific case here. I mean, they're acting as a prosecutor in the court of public opinion. And a prosecutor doesn't just start with the murder, right? They start with the premeditation.
Right.
And the poem actually begins long before Easter Sunday.
Right. The timeline the poet constructs is, well, it's fascinating because they point to this trail of escalating religious violence that, you know, at the time probably seemed disconnected.
Yeah.
The text specifically calls out the vandalization of a Buddha statue in Mawanella. They say it was done by yellow-robed thieves. And it points to fires being stoked by the Buru Bala Sena, which is a hardline nationalist group in the town of Burwala. And it also mentions the brutal hacking to death of 2 individuals in Vavanathivu.
Right.
So these are highly specific, geographically distinct events. How does the poet connect those dots to the bombings?
Well, by framing them as calculated kindling. The poet is basically suggesting these early provocative incidents were deliberate misdirection.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And to understand the mechanism of that misdirection, we have to look at the psychological landscape of Sri Lanka at the time. I mean, the country had endured a brutal 26-year civil war with the LTTE, the Tamil Tigers.
Right, which left massive generational scars.
Exactly. So the poem highlights how the Vavanathivu murders and this discovery of hidden weapons were just hastily blamed on the Kodi, which is the LTTE.
Right, and blaming the LTTE, I mean, that's like hitting a massive societal panic button.
Oh, absolutely.
It immediately consumes all the public's attention and all the intelligence apparatus's focus. So the poet is arguing that by waving this terrifying ghost of the LTTE in front of everyone, the real perpetrators were operating completely in the shadows.
Yeah, it's essentially a textbook manipulation of historical trauma. I mean, if you want to hide a new threat, you dress it up in the clothes of the monster everyone is already terrified of.
Man, that's dark.
It is. And the poet writes that this maneuver, quote, blinded the eyes of the gods.
Wow.
Right. So they're establishing this foundational argument that these were not just random organic acts of communal violence. This was a calculated sequence.
The groundwork was being laid right out in the open.
Exactly. The groundwork for a massive tragedy was visibly being laid, but the narrative was aggressively manipulated by what the text calls invisible hands.
Invisible hands. Yeah, that phrase really serves as the chilling core of this text, but it's paired with this recurring, almost agonizing motif throughout the poem.
The questioning.
Yeah, the poet keeps looking up, like, why didn't the gods see this? Why didn't the divine intervene when the misdirection was happening right out in the open?
And the tension there is really the entire engine of the poem, because the poet contrasts the alleged hypercompetence of these invisible hands with the absolute silence of the divine.
Which is such a human reaction, isn't it?
Totally. I mean, when human systems fail so spectacularly, people instinctively look to a higher power for justice or, protection.
Yeah.
And the poet is standing in the ashes, holding up these undeniable warning signs and demanding to know how heaven could have possibly missed them. If human intelligence agencies were blinded by the LTTE smokescreen, shouldn't the ultimate omniscient judge have seen through it?
Right. Well, let's transition from that ideological smokescreen to the hard physical evidence the poet outlines.
Good idea.
Because the text shifts from theoretical manipulation to really tactical reality. The poem lists these chilling specifics like suicide jackets found hidden under a bridge, discoveries of C4 detonators, a motorcycle blown to pieces by a bomb. I mean, this isn't just chatter on a wiretap. This is physical ordnance sitting in the real world.
Right, hard evidence.
But wait, help me understand something here, because people miss things. Intelligence failures happen in every country. I mean, look at 9/11.
Sure.
How does the poet elevate this from a tragic bureaucratic screw-up to, like, a deliberate stand-down?
Well, the poet elevates the accusation by focusing on the active suppression of the response. The text makes a highly specific, shocking claim regarding a man named Zahran Hashim, who was the known mastermind behind the attacks.
Right.
The poem states that the military actually mobilized to apprehend Zahran. Like, they had the target they were en route,
Wow.
but they were actively blocked. Someone stopped them from making the arrest.
Man, and that brings us to another operational detail in the text that really just stops you in your tracks.
The checkpoint.
Yes, the checkpoint. The poet describes a scenario where a lorry, literally filled with bombs, is intercepted and caught at a security checkpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And the guards do their job. Then an order comes down from above, forcing the guards to release the lorry. How does a poet use a detail like a checkpoint release to prove complicity?
Think about the mechanism of a checkpoint, right?
Mm-hmm.
It acts like the immune system of a state.
Okay.
The white blood cells, the guards on the ground, they recognize the pathogen, they flag the lorry. The system, at its lowest, most functional level, actually worked.
Right, they caught it.
Exactly. But then the brain sent a direct signal to override the immune response and let the virus through anyway.
Oh, wow. That's a great analogy.
Yeah, so by focusing on the phrase, an order from above, the poet maps out a vertical hierarchy of guilt. The doors to this tragedy weren't accidentally left open due to incompetence.
They were actively unlocked.
Exactly. They were deliberately unlocked from the inside by the very people who run the system.
And the poem just hammers home a sickening contrast regarding who is inside that locked room.
Right.
Because it explicitly states that intelligence warnings were circulated that an attack would happen today or tomorrow.
The timeline was that precise.
It was. And yet the poet notes that the president went abroad, citing what the text actually calls a fake illness.
Mm-hmm.
And politicians who, would normally be seen in the front pews for a major holiday, notably avoided attending church on Easter Sunday.
Yeah.
The poet explicitly weaponizes this contrast, layering the image of the political elite fleeing or hiding directly over the image of citizens just sitting in the pews. It's devastating. The survival of the powerful is juxtaposed directly against the slaughter of the innocent.
Right.
The poet notes that the VIPs saved themselves, while the ordinary people, the innocents who didn't get the secret memo, basically went to heaven.
Yeah.
And that bitterness asks a fundamental question about the social contract itself. I mean, what is the value of a state intelligence network if it's only used to shield the architects and the political elite while treating the tax-paying public as entirely expendable?
Exactly. So the physical dust settles, the attacks happen, over 300 people are dead, but surviving the attack was really only the first trauma.
Sadly, yes.
What happened next, the institutional response is what actually broke the poet's faith in the state.
Mm-hmm.
Because as we move into the aftermath of the bombings, the poem's tone shifts from raw grief into this razor-sharp, furious cynicism.
Oh, absolutely. The post-attack landscape the poet paints is perhaps even more disturbing than the lead-up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in the lead-up, you can at least maintain the illusion of a functioning society that was simply outsmarted.
But in the aftermath, the poet describes a total, deliberate inversion of justice.
Well, yeah, because the text points out the bitterest of ironies. I mean, you have officials who publicly admitted on the record that they received the warnings, they knew an attack was coming, but their defense was essentially, well, we didn't think they'd kill this many people.
Which is just an unbelievable thing to say out loud.
Right, and the poem emphasizes that these officials were allowed to just walk away, no accountability whatsoever.
None.
Then the poet targets the political exploitation of the tragedy. The text introduces the figure of a hero, a political entity who leverages the fear, the blood, and the ashes of Easter Sunday to launch an election campaign.
Right.
They ride into power on the singular promise of protecting the country and finding the masterminds.
And this is where the sleight of hand returns, right? But on an institutional level.
How so?
Well, once this hero wins the election, the poet observes that no real architects are ever caught. Instead, the investigators who were actively trying to find the truth are the ones sent to prison.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the text claims that 700 law enforcement officers were abruptly transferred.
Okay, wait, let me push back on that number for a second. Transferring 700 officers. I mean, couldn't the government just argue that's a standard administrative reshuffle?
They could.
Like, if you have a massive intelligence failure, you clean house, right? How does the poet frame this to prove it's malicious obstruction rather than just incompetent bureaucratic cleanup?
We have to look at the mechanism of institutional memory.
Okay.
If you want to solve a complex conspiracy, you need detectives who understand the nuances.
Yeah.
Right? They need to know the informants, the timeline, the connection.
Right, the groundwork.
Exactly. So when you transfer 700 officers at once, you aren't cleaning house. You are formatting the hard drive.
Oh, that makes sense.
You're actively destroying the institutional memory of the investigation. The new officers have to start from scratch, which effectively resets the clock on justice. The investigations stall. So the poet uses that massive number to illustrate that this wasn't an administrative error. It was a deliberate logistical tactic to dismantle the pursuit of truth.
And the poet doesn't just make sweeping statements about obstruction, they bring receipts.
Oh, definitely.
The poem highlights specific unresolved mysteries that just kind of hang in the air, demanding answers.
Yeah, the details are chilling.
Yeah, for instance, the text mentions a specific house where a bomb didn't explode, and intelligence officers arrived at that house. The poet demands to know the logistics, like what happened there. Were phone calls made from that location? Who was on the other end of those calls?
The forensic indictment just continues from there. The poet asks, did the intelligence services wipe out the bomber's family to silence them?
Wow.
Yeah. And what about the girl who allegedly helped plan the logistics? Did she escape? Did the state fake a DNA test using a corpse to pretend she was dead?
That's heavy.
It is. These lines really transform the poem. It's no longer just a lament for the dead. It's laying out the blueprints of a massive coordinated cover-up.
The poet is essentially saying, I see the strings. We all see the strings.
Right.
They even call out the sycophants. They refer to them as rice eaters or dependents who are writing books to protect the murderers.
Mm-hmm.
The text describes these dependents actively begging terrorist groups to claim responsibility just to shield the real domestic architects of the violence. It paints a picture of a completely corrupted ecosystem where the truth is just actively hunted down and buried.
Which brings us back to the central agonizing refrain of the poem, right?
Yeah.
Can't even the gods solve this?
Yeah.
Throughout the text, the silence of the divine is used as a mirror. It reflects the silence of the justice system.
Oh, I see.
The poet is basically asking, if the courts are compromised, if the police are transferred, if the politicians are complicit, then surely the ultimate judge, the divine, must intervene. You look to the heavens when the earth offers no recourse.
But the heavens remain quiet.
They do.
And the big places of power remain untouched. And the poet explicitly calls out the institutional black holes where the truth has just vanished.
Right.
They demand to know. Where are the lists of names that were formally submitted to the courts? What happened to them? And most damningly, they point to 3 separate commission reports, 3 official state-sponsored inquiries into the attacks, and their findings are just kept hidden from the public.
And burying those 3 commission reports is the ultimate act of state-sponsored amnesia.
Mm-hmm.
Because When official channels of justice are entirely boarded up, when reports are classified, and when the system protects the perpetrators instead of the victims, public memory becomes the only battleground left.
Right.
That is the true function of this poem. It refuses to let the specifics, the released Lori, the 700 transferred officers, the fake DNA tests, it refuses to let those be swallowed by that official amnesia.
It's a ledger, a permanent chilling ledger of what the people saw, even if the courts refuse to look.
Exactly.
So why does this matter to you listening to this deep dive right now? Why should a poem about a tragedy in Sri Lanka resonate globally?
It's a fair question.
Well, because it's a masterclass in how citizens document their own history when the state tries to erase it. It is a universal warning about the fragility of justice.
Right.
It reminds us that truth doesn't just disappear. When the official hard drives are wiped, the truth gets absorbed by the culture, by the artists, by the writers who refuse to be quiet.
It really forces us to consider a profound reality about how history is recorded, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
I mean, when the smoke clears, the official narratives are almost always written by the victors.
Always.
But when 3 separate commission reports remain locked in a vault, hidden from the public eye,
Right.
does art become the only remaining court of law? Does a piece of paper with verses on it become the final unerasable place where the evidence can actually be heard?
That's a powerful thought. And, think back to that collapsed building we talked about at the beginning.
Right.
The state might try to clear the rubble as fast as possible. They might pave over the foundation and put up a monument to pretend it was just a tragic earthquake. They might tell everyone to move on. But as long as someone is standing there, holding up a severed detonator wire and asking, "What is this?" the illusion can never truly hold. The engineered chaos is exposed. And sometimes it takes a